right, so after vowing not to increase taxes on anybody making less than $250,000, the Anointed One now appears to be considering a value-added tax. Now, that is a tax that is applied to nearly all goods and services. And here's what the president told CNBC when asked about the subject just yesterday.
I know that there's been a lot of talk around town lately about the value-added tax. That is something that has worked for some countries. It's something that would be novel for the United States. And before I start saying this makes sense or that makes sense, I want to get a better picture of what our options are.
Now, some members of the administration, though, appear not to have gotten the message. Take a look at the White House propaganda minister and what he told reporters yesterday.
I think I directly answered this the other day by saying that it wasn't something that the president had under consideration.
All right, so maybe he should talk to his boss. Now, the same goes for gaffe-prone Joe Biden, who seemed like he was trying to cover for the Anointed One earlier today on The View.
If we're going to start talking about a national sales tax on top of everything else, what taxes can you guys remove?
Well, Bob, we aren't talking about that.
The president is.
No, the president said he was open to listening about that.
All right, so what's really going on here? Joining me now with analysis is Iowa Congressman Steve King. Congressman, good to see you. Thanks for being here.
Good to be back with you, Sean. Thank you.
All right, so the president floats the idea. Paul Volcker floats the idea. Then Gibbs says no. The vice president says no. Geithner says no, but then says, well, we've got to increase revenues. How serious is the talk of a national sales tax on top of income taxes in Washington today?
Well, I think it's really serious. I mean, clearly they have floated the trial balloon. Paul Volcker floated it as blatant and as open as it could be. And I thought then that all of America should have lined up and shot that trial balloon down. But now we've got the president himself speaking about it being a novel idea for Americans. We know that the president has been actively engaged in supporting about anything that he can import from Western Europe, including Spain's cap and tax program as the model we should follow. And we know that's a catastrophe. The value-added tax, the VAT tax, is a catastrophe out of much of Europe, not quite all of Europe, and that's what I expect they're going to try to prepare the groundwork for. I don't know how they pay for Obamacare unless they step in and do something like this value-added tax, which is insidious and it's regressive. It taxes the people that have the least amount of income, and it gives government the maximum opportunity to maximize their tax revenue. It's a horrible thing to think about in a free country, and if we ever adopt a value-added tax, a VAT tax, it'll be a big step towards the death knell of the liberty of a formerly free people.
Yeah, I mean, what's amazing to me about this is it's been tried in Europe, and it's only resulted in a lack of economic growth. And but the bottom line is the president's already spent all this money. He's already accumulated $3 trillion in debt in 2 years. He's projected now out another $10 trillion more in debt, and we're not even talking about the health care debt. So I guess in a liberal's mind, the only way to raise taxes, if you don't believe in cutting growth and unleashing economic activity, is that you've got to tax people. You've got to confiscate their wealth. So is this something that we would expect after the election or after 2012, thinking that he's going to get reelected?
Well, I think that, they will be looking for a crisis situation. They're seeking to characterize this as a crisis situation. And when you look at the predictions that by 2020, just 10 years from now, it's projected under the Obama budget that 100% of the GDP will be the equivalent of the national debt. That is the national deficit. That is a huge number. And it's chilling to think that all that we could generate in a year would be all it would take to pay off the deficit that we have in spending. So this is the only alternative they have. They do want to grow government. I'd add this to all of the nationalization that we have seen, a third of the private sector activity, plus Obamacare, plus the student loan program. Where else do you go if you want bigger and more government? Well, you go to the European model that originated in France. And by the way, the value-added tax in that part of the world, Denmark, for example, started at 9%. Today it's 25%. The Danes that I talk to that are private sector business entrepreneurs tell me their tax burden is at 75%. And I ask them, why do you go to work? That's the question Ronald Reagan asked back in 1975.
Yeah, but, look, I can tell you right now, for example, if you're in New York or New Jersey, under President Obama, your income tax, when the Bush tax cuts expire, that's going to be 40%. A 25% increase in Medicare taxes to another 4%, which is where it's going to end up. You add to that county taxes, property taxes, 9 or 10% sales taxes, or 7 or 8, 9% sales tax. and everything else, we're at 70% in a state like New York. So,
you know, Sean,
go ahead. That's without the value-added tax.
You make a really good point on that. In a way, it is. And I recall back actually in the 90s, I went around and did seminars in the 5-state area in the upper Midwest on tax burden. And I took self-employed people because they were my trade association and went through and added that up and got input from the group always. And we would add up the federal income tax, state income tax, and the excise taxes, and we would get up there over 50%. And I would save the sales tax till last, because if you're paying 50% on everything else, you're paying that with after-tax income as a rule. So you double that number. So if it's a 7% sales tax, it's actually 14. And we found even then we were between 65 and 75% in tax liability. So when you accrue this and add the property tax to it in the way you said, it does come to a number that's in that 75% range. And the burden of government is so great that has diminished the vitality of the private sector, what's left of it in America. And if we are going to take this country up to the next level, above this shining city on the hill that we've largely become, and because of Ronald Reagan, we're going to have lower taxes, less government, and it isn't going to work for us to slow the growth of government. We are now going to have to come back in after November with new majorities and actually cut real government spending and lay this out for the long term to get to a balanced budget, and do that in a short period of time.
Congressman, I got to tell you something. I'm concerned that we're now crossing a threshold to irreparable damage, where I don't know how it's going to become feasible or possible to pay off the amount of spending and the amount of debt we're accumulating, but we'll continue to watch it. Congressman, thanks for being with us.
Well, and Sean, if